endlessly searching for an original sound.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sweet Pool. Things are just starting to heat up, aren't they? Also, what exactly is our character? Well, hopefully we'll find out. The morning bell ended and the bell rang, signaling the start of lunchtime. Immediately, Yuji stood up and left the room. Cutting through the courtyard, he entered the old building and headed for the roof. With every step up the musty old staircase, his nerves grew worse and worse. Tetsuo hadn't exactly agreed to meet him, so there was no guarantee he was going to show up at all. When he'd left the classroom, Yuji had purposely avoided looking at him. Somehow, he didn't want to know whether Tetsuo planned on turning up. Arriving at the door of the rooftop, Yuji pulled it open and stepped out onto the roof. There was no sign of anyone else, just a wide-open swath of concrete. Would he come? Yuji walked over to the fence and leaned back against it. His gaze dropped to the ground, and he absently scuffed his shoes against the concrete. Every minute seemed to last an eternity. Maybe Tetsuo wasn't coming? Should he even bother waiting for him? Giving up was sounding better and better. Just then, the door opened and Tetsuo stepped out onto the roof. Yuji felt his heart beat faster as the other man approached. Then he saw it. Tetsuo's bruises were gone. That was what he had felt off in the classroom. Back in that room, wherever it was, Zhenya had taken them. Tetsuo had been injured. Yuji had touched the bruises himself. Had it been a trick of the dim lighting? No, he'd felt the swelling. Then how? Tetsuo walked right up to Yuji and leaned against the fence next to him. Yuji stared blankly at his face, but couldn't see any trace of his injuries. How was that possible? He felt his mistrust of Tetsuo growing. Maybe Tetsuo really was working with Zhenya. He dismissed the idea last night, but what if he'd faked those injuries? Suspicion morphed into anger, and Yuji shot Tetsuo a glare. Tetsuo's composure fanned Yuji's rage. It felt like proof that he knew everything. Tetsuo didn't answer. But Yuji wasn't feeling patient, and this only frustrated him further. Tetsuo paused for a moment. Yuji refused to accept it for an answer. Once again, Tetsuo said nothing. Surely, if he were innocent, he would defend himself, right? What the hell was his problem? More than the dishonesty, it was Tetsuo's attitude that Yuji found truly infuriating. Even now, he couldn't tell what Tetsuo was thinking. Was he connected to Zhenya? Did he know about Yuji's condition? There were so many questions Yuji wanted to ask, but the most pressing of them all was, why had Tetsuo touched him like that? There in that dark room? With Tetsuo standing right in front of him, the memory was clearer than ever. At the same time, he felt a strange ache deep inside. Don't get horny at school. His gut throbbing faintly, almost as if he'd grown a second heart. Then he realized what it was. The same sensation he felt in the room and before every one of his recent attacks. It always happened the same way. His pulse raced, his breath grew ragged. These were the signs that he was losing control, which meant he didn't have much time. Without conscious thought, his body turned toward the door, but Tetsuo grabbed his arm from behind.
待てよ。触るな。
So now we have a choice. Not you. Let's see. Oh. Yuji yanked on his arm, trying to shake Tetsuo. Prying Tetsuo's fingers off, Yuji dashed away. Now I want to see really quickly what happens if you pick the other one. Loading, loading, loading. No, bad. Yuji yanked on his arm, trying to shake Tetsuo off. A strange sweet smell was in the air. This, too, was something he'd encountered before. The smell filled his brain with a pleasant thought. Prying Tetsuo's fingers off, Yuji dashed away. Flinging open the door, he bolted down the stairs and out the old building. Just as he was cutting through the courtyard, however, he felt a sudden sharp pain in his bowels. Gritting his teeth, Yuji hurled to the main building, down toward the restroom, the same one Tetsuo had dragged him in previously. So we see that. Before we do that, I want to see if that whole thing changes. Forgive me, I am just very curious about this scene. The load is slow on this game, yes. Yuji yanked on his arm, trying to shake Tetsuo. Prying Tetsuo's fingers off, Yuji dashed away. Flinging open the door, he bolted down the stairs and out the old building. Just as he was cutting through the courtyard, however, he felt a sudden sharp pain in his bowels. Gritting his teeth, Yuji hurtled into the main building and down the hall to the restroom, the same one Tetsuo had dragged him into previously. He darted into a stall and locked the door and put both hands on the wall in front of him. His head hung as he grimaced in pain. His body knew what was going to happen next. There was no stopping it, no matter how hard he tried. The pain in his gut swelled as something grew inside him. With sweaty hands, Yuji loosened his belt and lowered his pants and underwear. His entrance burned as the first trickle slid down his thigh. Shame filled his heart to bursting. All he could do was gasp for breath and wait for the nightmare to end. The swelling in his abdomen grew rapidly, until it was almost too much to bear. Then finally, the tension drained from his body. His crushing despair was accompanied by a wet plop. Yuji squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself not to look. But even without confirmation, he knew it was there. The memory unfolded behind his eyelids, every bit as vivid and as the real thing. The puddle of blood with a red lump floating in it. The lump is covered in thick veiny lines. It twitches like a little heart. A little heart? Yuji pulled his pants away from the wall and pressed them to his face. Oh, his hands, not his pants. He refused to look. He wouldn't accept it. But at the same time, he knew that it wouldn't stop. You're not human. Yuji whimpered, biting back a scream. If no one could tell him what was happening to his body, then maybe he really wasn't human. There was no light at the end of this tunnel. It took all the strength he had just to stifle his sobs. After he had dressed himself, Yuji walked out of the boys' bathroom, leaving his mess behind. He knew there was a chance someone might see it, but he just didn't have the energy to clean it up. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror as he walked by. All the color had drained from his face. Even his lips were as pale as a corpse. He felt absolutely awful. Unable to summon the willpower to go to the nurse's office, Yuji staggered back to class. Finally, class ended as Yuji quickly packed his things. Makoto walked up to him with a concerned expression.
ああ。ちょっと体調が良くなくて。
そっか。じゃあ早く帰った方がいいよな。
Makoto looked up as if he had something more to say. Hesitation was written all over his face.
聞いてもいいか？
何を？
今日白沼に何か用とかあったのか？朝話しかけてたみたいだったから。
I wonder if the blue one is us telling the truth or not. Would you stop with that? At Tetsuo's name, Yuji felt a twinge of annoyance. He tried to hide it, but he had the feeling it might have shown on his face.
なんでもない。
なんでもないって。
I am really curious now. I want one of the thing, my big complaint is you don't really get to see what either choice is. Like, it's just colored coded in this.
Ah.
Okay, yeah, that's the one I wanted. His face stiffened at Tetsuo's name, but he quickly forced a smile to hide it.
いや、そんなに大したことじゃない。この間のことを、一応礼を言っておこうと思って。
礼？
Makoto narrowed his eyes suspiciously. He had seen through Yuji's impromptu excuse. Forcing down the surge of panic, Yuji elaborated.
ああ、保健室に連れてったやつか。あ、そっか。なるほどね。
Makoto nodded in understanding, and Yuji suppressed a sigh of relief.
白沼の反応。なんか言ってきた。
いや、別に。特には。
だろうな。あいつ、そういうの全然気にしなさそうだしな。
Makoto shrugged. For some reason, this made Yuji restless. Just leave me alone. Yuji looked away, ashamed of that thought. Okay, so we have what happens if you lie to him. So what happens if you kinda... let me save. I know this must be very annoying for everybody. At Tetsuo's name, Yuji felt a twinge of annoyance. He tried to hide it, but he had a feeling it might have shown on his face.
なんでもない。
なんでもないって。
Makoto dropped his gaze to his shoes, then ran a hand over the back of his head.
確かに、俺は関係ねえけどさ。
Yuji knew that Makoto was probably just worried about him. But at the same time... Wow! I don't want to be an asshole. I like him. I'd rather lie. I know it's awful.
ごめん。
ああ、うん。それじゃあ、またな。
Makoto smiled faintly and gave a slight wave. Yuji replied with a nod and then grabbed his book bag and headed for the door. The lockers. He paused and changed his shoes, then walked through the front doors. Squinting against the sunset, Yuji passed through the school gates and headed for the train station. If he'd kept talking to Makoto, he had a feeling he would have exploded. He appreciated Makoto's concern, but at the same time it felt strange. Why was Makoto so concerned about him? Because they were friends? God forbid friends are concerned about each other, right? Were they? He considered the meaning of the word. Friends are people who get along, who enjoy spending time together, who share common interests. But none of these quite fit their relationship. He could see why Makoto had so many friends. He was a cheerful, thoughtful guy. Who wouldn't like him? There was no doubt the time he spent with Makoto was one of the few bright spots in Yuji's life. But what did Yuji have to offer in return? Taken objectively, it all seemed so unclear. He just couldn't understand why Makoto was so nice to him. Makoto's other friends probably wondered the same thing. It didn't make sense. All of a sudden, Yuji felt his anxiety spike. Panic set in, and his chest grew tight. His hands moved on autopilot, pulling out his phone and starting a new email. After typing a message that amounted to little more than pleasantries, he selected the recipient, Erika. Though part of him thought it, he forced himself to press send. He needed reassurance. An answer would do. But Erika still hadn't replied by the time he arrived at the train station. He sighed deeply. He knew he shouldn't expect her to be in his beck and call, but he couldn't help but feel disappointed. With another sigh, he tossed his phone back into his bag. On the way home, his anxiety remained constant, neither growing nor receding. He pushed his way through the crowds of people and boarded the packed train. Clinging to a grab handle, he steadied himself as the train rattled down the track. In the end, Erika was the only person he knew he could trust completely. Of that alone, he had no doubt. You know Okinawa Zhenya, right? The Yakuza-san? Total creep, am I right? You know, he's always kinda one corn dog short of a picnic, if you get my drift. Real loopy. Well, there's this bizarre rumor going around. Supposedly he disappears every day exactly at 5 p.m. Isn't that weird? I thought so at first too. But people say he'll be screaming his head off one minute, then it'll go all quiet, and when they look around, he's just gone. I mean, hardly anybody sticks around that late anyway, so it's not surprising you don't hear about it much. Some people say they've seen him rolling around on the ground, screaming. There are stories of his driver carrying him out of the building, too, stuff like that. Well, you know how Yuga Koyaki always plays at 5 p.m.? They say he disappears right when it starts. Isn't that kind of creepy? Almost like a ghost story. I mean, he's not a ghost, but whatever he is, he's bad news. Yikes. Bitches. Zhenya staggered down the hall, bracing himself against the wall as he went. The cursed bells beat against his eardrums, every note a scorching brand. Sweat trickled down his face and dripped from his chin. He grimaced. It felt like someone had stuck a dagger right into his eye. Normally, he always made sure to leave school by 5 p.m., but today he'd lost track of time. It was their fault. Tetsuo and Yuji. Lately, he couldn't get them out of his mind. Illuminated by the setting sun, the hallway was devoid of life, and his groans of pain went unheard. Ahead, there was only a restroom and a storage closet. Hardly anyone would bother coming down this way. If he locked himself in the toilet stall, he could wait it out without being seen. On days 5 p.m. rolled around while he was still on campus, Zhenya would often use the restroom as a hiding place. His body screamed in protest. It felt like his muscles and organs were expanding inside him, threatening to pop him like a meaty balloon. His left eye was blistering hot. Every day at 5 p.m., the last light of day set the world ablaze before fading into the gentle night. This was the time Zenya's flesh came alive with joyous delirium. But that joy was then illusory. As he coughed, the taste of iron spread in his mouth. Saliva and blood mixed in his throat, and he swallowed it down, fighting the urge to cough again. He barreled headlong into the boys' bathroom, stumbled into a stall, and locked the door behind him. Leaning back against the door, Zhenya gasped for breath, face raised to the ceiling as if begging God for mercy. Hand shaking, he clumsily dug his phone out of his pants and pressed the button for speed dial. The phone rang again and again. Pick up. Pick up. Answer answer, damn it! Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He tried to adjust his grip, but the phone slipped through his stiff fingers and fell to the floor with a clatter. Unable to muster the energy to retrieve it, Zhenya slid down the stall door to the floor. His body felt like a thick branch bent nearly to break. His flesh demanded freedom, release, pain, pain, endless pain. His nose stung, his eyes burned. You got a little something on you. Tears slid down his cheeks as he sobbed. Though it tormented him every day, it never got any easier. The pain of being rebuilt from within. He could still hear the phone ringing.
早く来い。早く早く早く早く。早く早く早く早く早く。
Tears continued to spill down his face as he chanted the word like a prayer. Surely it wouldn't be much longer. Every time Zhenya was forced to hole up in the restroom, he was always made sure to call. The song was ending, but his flesh still screaming. After what felt like hours, he heard the sound of footsteps dash down the hall. A familiar voice echoed through the restroom. Zhenya tried to call out a reply, but his voice was a faint croak. His lips were dry and cracked. Sniffling, he pounded on the stall door instead. The stall shook and Zhenya mustered the strength to lift his arm to unlock the door. Immediately the door burst open and a pale-faced Katani dashed inside. Gone was his usual composure. Katani's chiseled features were rigid with fear. Even as he cried, Zhenya couldn't help but think that he wore the look well. Katani took one look at Zhenya and heaved a sigh of relief. Zhenya grabbed Katani's hand and slowly heaved himself to his feet. His legs were shaking. It felt like the tile floor was made of soggy sponges. Katani peered at Zenya's face, his brow furrowed. His burly hand touched Zenya's wet right cheek. His eye was probably bleeding again.
遅いんだよ、バカ。うんこ、バカ、アホ。
すみません。さあ、帰りましょう。
Katani stooped down to pick up Zenya's phone. Then he put the boy's arm over his shoulder. Zenya's tears had stopped, but his body was still a cacophony of pain. Every inch of him was sore. With Katani's support, Zhenya hobbled out of the bathroom. Careful to stay out of sight, they made their way to the side gates. Even with his head lolling, Zhenya could see the colors of sunset illuminating everything around them. This was by far his least favorite time of day. It was the only time he actually preferred to be home. It was so much easier to just curl up in his room until the pain went away. Today had been a colossal fuck-up. And it was all their fault. All because Yuji and Tetsuo were driving him crazy. Just you wait. As Zhenya endured the stabs of pain, he felt the corners of his mouth rise ever so slightly. Uh-oh. Katani hadn't gotten much sleep last night. Perched on the edge of the dining room table, he pulled a cigarette pack and glanced up at the clock on the wall. It was just past midnight. He lit the cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled slowly. Finally, he could feel himself begin to relax. Zhenya had been holed up in his room ever since he'd gotten home from school. Well, that's where we're going to leave it, guys. We'll find out exactly what he's been doing up there next time. So thank you so much for enjoying this series and all of your wonderful support. I can't wait to show you lots of new series in the future. If you guys are enjoying these horror visual novels, please let me know, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.